Ah. Someone's forehead. Good morning, Rezu. I hope I'm pronouncing your name close to right. Can you hear me?
Hello, good morning. Yes, Arezu. Yes, you're right. How are you? Tony, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay, thank you. Excellent. Here, let's try that. Yeah. Can you hear this?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought you didn't hear me. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's good. That's fine. It might be a good idea to mute your microphone until you have something you want all of us to hear.
Sure.
Now, chat. There we go. Now I have the camera. Morning. Morning. Hoping Kenneth gets here soon. See if the remote will catch me and follow me. Let's try this. Over here. Hopefully the CIA pays for better quality. Camera feels like it's looking for me. Hello? Down here? Getting closer. So if I was 7 feet tall, or would fit more, I think it would get the top of my head. Pardon?
tugiye kugera ahantu hatari rezo
inde
nyine imbere yo gutanga amafaranga ariko none ntabwo ushaka amafashe
nimero yandi ya Anita
niba ifite wayifowadinga.
This would explain why the drones end up killing so many innocent, unintended people. I think they kill almost always innocent people, but
and
okay, over here. Okay, I'm gonna turn the tracking off, I guess. Then, let's see. Okay, well, all of this is recorded now, but what I don't see on this, oh, I know, that's right, okay. Share screen. Huh, okay, I guess. Okay, there we go. So, not quite ideal. I've got a watch on, so I can do it that way. I know what I'll do. Settings. Sound off. Next. Timer. Of course, if my sound off, the timer won't make a sound. No, let's, okay, so turn the sound back on for a bit. Okay, it's 10:47. And I'm gonna wait another minute or two. I'm hoping that our regulars will come to class. I'm hoping that they continue to be regulars in class, specifically for today, but moving forward, because we're going to set up the groups for the final assignment. And yeah, it'd be best, I think, for everybody concerned if the people who are synchronous, right, who are off in Cloudland, muted their microphones until and only insofar as they don't have anything to say. If you have something to say, turn your microphone on. We're very keen. I'm very keen for your input. I'm sure your classmates in the room are keen too. But it's unhelpful if you're making sound by accident. So yeah, I'm gonna wait a minute or two in the hopes of a few more people showing up here. And then we'll get going one way or the other, and then we may have to circle back a little bit if more people show up in the classroom. Well, what I'll do then is I'll start with the second item that I had intended to do. So a significant portion of the course grade is devoted to a group literature review that, as the name suggests, is a group assignment. And I've mentioned before, and it's painfully obvious, especially if you watch these videos, that this is my first attempt at a HyFlex course. So I'm not 100% sure what the differences are going to be for group assignments in HiFlex compared to online and compared to in person. My initial thought, my hope was that the people who come to class regularly would form a group. And then I would form groups out of everybody else. But 3 people is not enough to be part of a group for the purposes of this assignment. So I'm going to wait a little bit before deciding about exactly how the groups, who's going to be in which group and how I'm going to go about doing that. But to describe the assignment, it's going to be the same for all groups and it's going to be the same for everybody in the groups. So I'll go ahead and describe the assignment. I'll describe the assignment overall. Then I'll describe in particular the first part, which is due. I've changed the due date for this first part, and I've amended the professor's addendum accordingly. So there's a new version, slight tiny little change. The works cited list is now due on the 20th of February, not on the 10th, as it had been, as I had originally planned it out. So there's a little bit longer to get that first part done and a little bit less time to get the next, like there's a shorter gap between when the first part is due and when the second part is due. But that'll be up to you and your groups to figure out that timing. So, so the group literature review, let's turn now to the description that I've posted. How do I get rid of this? Oh, no, okay, here. Under assignments, so I've posted a description under the group literature review. So in assignments, there's a description of what's required. So I'll read it and then we'll go through it. And then we're going to take a look at a couple of articles that could easily meet all of the requirements. And you'll get a feel for, hopefully you'll get a feel for what it is I'm talking about. Now, oh, I know I can do it over here. So this is a group assignment. You are collectively responsible for the project. So just to reiterate, I will make a decision today about how the groups are going to be organized. My initial position, I thought anyway, was that the students who come to class would form a group, and then I would randomly select, or I mean, there's software included in Blackboard to put students into a group, and for some tracking, surveillance, grading purposes, that's very convenient for me and correspondingly convenient for the students. If it's only the 3 of you here today, well, I mean, you're here now. Are you more or less anticipating coming to class every week? I'm not looking for an absolute commitment, but is that your expectation that you'll come to class every week? I mean, barring unforeseeable circumstances and so on. So then what I think I'll do is I'll put the 3 of you into a group and add, I haven't done the math in my head yet, but add probably 1 or 2 students to your group. And then the rest of the students will be divided so that the groups will be as close to the same in numbers as the math works out. So for this assignment, you are going to be taking a look at scholarly literature connected to the issues, connected in a way that I'll spend some time this morning, a little bit later this morning, articulating, but it's a preliminary version of that articulation is it's a very open-ended understanding. I'm looking for you to take a look at the scholarly literature, a term that I'll describe, at least for the purposes of this assignment, in a few minutes when we take a look at some sample articles. And let me just keep reading here. The core of this assignment is to find and compare scholarly articles dealing with some aspect of the ideas, institutions, interests framework in terms of which the history of migration to Canada is analyzed in the making of the mosaic. So this analytical framework is described in the assigned first reading. We spent some time looking at it last week. We're going to take a look at the history part of it today after this part of the class is taken care of. Each group must find the same number of articles as they have members. If there are 6 of you in the group, you need to find 6 articles. So that's the sort of general structure. For the first stage of the assignment, the first stage of the assignment is to find your articles and produce a works cited list. A works cited list is a standard component of scholarly work, scholarly research, especially in the social sciences, in the humanities, but certainly also in the natural sciences. But my area is the humanities and social sciences, so I mean, it's true about natural sciences too. So this is a standard component in, on the one hand, the research that's done by researchers. It's also a standard component of work done by undergraduate students. So essays that are done in undergraduate courses in the sciences, in the social sciences and humanities, almost always, not absolutely always, but almost always require of the students to compile a works cited list. Now, some of you, I'll start over. Because you come from so many different programs, there's no way for me to be sure how many essays you've written, the kinds of writing that is appropriate and required in all of the different programs you're in. So it would be, I have not been able to figure out a way to reasonably and equitably assign essays to everybody in the course, in this course. I think most of the pedagogical value, or much of the pedagogical value of getting you to write an essay, and to, in particular, to do the research component of writing an essay, can be accomplished using this group literature review model, which I didn't invent. I don't even remember where I found it, but this is now a fairly widely used component in social science and humanities courses. So the first stage of the assignment is to find your articles and produce this works cited list. I've provided at the bottom down here a link to the Seneca Library website, where they provide the specific formatting that I'm asking you, well, telling you to use for the production of this works cited list. The format we're using is Modern Languages Association. If there's any interest in this, we could discuss it later perhaps, but for now, I'll just leave it at that. So now, all of your articles must be from scholarly journals. This is an absolute requirement, and for the most part, students have had no trouble with this, but every single semester there are students who I've yet to figure out a way to make this transparently clear to absolutely everybody. And so we're going to take a look at a couple of examples of exactly what I mean, and I will describe to you what this excludes. So scholarly articles are articles that are written in journals, in scholarly journals. It's not magazine articles, it's not chapters in books, it's not web pages. And the distinction is arbitrary in two sorts of senses. It's arbitrary on the one hand, in that it's going to exclude an enormous amount of very valuable, very important information. So I'm not making this distinction because I think everything in the internet is stupid or false or anything along those lines. I'm narrowing it down just for the purpose of making, or not just, partly for the purpose of making it more manageable. From the point of view, from my point of view, as someone, as a 60-year-old, I'm still unclear about how to evaluate those kinds of sources. I'm much less unclear about, and I'm much more familiar with scholarly articles. That's those were, I was the only thing on the table when I was an undergrad and when I was a graduate student. And so for that reason anyway, I'm restricting your work to that portion of the available information on these issues. If you're not sure whether the source you're using is a scholarly article for the purposes of this assignment, send it to me and I'll tell you. So it's worth your while to check early on, because if you choose an article that doesn't meet that criteria, that article is going to get 0 for that portion of that assignment. You need to make sure you're picking a scholarly article. Okay, now. Okay. What you are looking for, so are scholarly articles in which the author or authors discuss, analyze, comment on, or otherwise address some aspect of the issues raised in the course. You need to be, in order to begin to select an article, you have to at least understand or recognize what some of these issues are. It's a very open-ended list. The course was organized, was imagined before it was ever fully developed as an interdisciplinary exercise that reflects, or that was intended, and I believe to reflect the actual subject matter. Migration, citizenship, belonging, these are not human phenomena that are even plausibly reducible to any specific scholarly discipline. There are economic components to it, but there are also social components, philosophical components, legal components, and those are all different academic disciplines, each of which approach many, many different aspects of all of the different phenomena that are gathered in the subject that we're studying, and many more besides that. So I have a wide scope. I'm encouraging you to approach this from as wide a range of possible perspectives, possible scholarly perspectives, as you can imagine. Okay. In addition to producing a works cited list, you must briefly describe how the articles are connected to each other and to some specific aspect of the problems, challenges, methods, theories, or case studies dealt with in the course. This will require you to coordinate your efforts already at this stage. In the past, one of the things I did wrong was to not make this part of it clear enough. And so many of the groups, the students just on their own, picked an article that was all by itself absolutely a good article, a fine article, but they didn't coordinate amongst themselves, the students in the group, so they had articles that were much more difficult to combine into the final shape of what it is you are intended to do for the final part of this article. So in order to clarify that a little bit, what I've done is I've included in, we're going to take a look at some of the ways that these issues can be combined. It's still very, very broad. And the better you understand your article, the more easily it will be to connect it to virtually any other article that's broadly in this area. Anyway, so we'll take a look at some articles and then we'll come back and try to demonstrate the ways these articles could be used to fulfill the requirements of the work of this first part of the assignment. So now, so here's out in Cloudland. Can you see the article on your screen? The Journal of Migration and Health?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you. So now let me just make that bigger. So this is an example of a scholarly article. I'm going to stand up now. Let me see. Okay, let's still catch me. So the systematized exploitation of temporary migrant agricultural workers in Canada. So I think the title of it, to me anyway, the title of it automatically right away, it's easy to see several different ways in which this satisfies the requirements. First of all, Journal of Migration and Health. It's a scholarly journal. It has, and it's about the exploitation of migrant workers in Canada. So that's absolutely part of what it is we're doing. Overall, falls well within it. Now, to illustrate what I mean, so if you take a look at where these particular researchers, what the discipline from within which these particular researchers are offering this analysis, these are all medical professors of medicine. 4 of the 5 are from Quebec, and one of them is from the University of Calgary, but they've all they've collaborated to whatever degree, I don't know, but they've collaborated to produce this piece of research, the exacerbation of health vulnerabilities during COVID-19 pandemic and recommendations for the future. One thing that so in the second stage of this assignment, there's a works cited list it's due February 20th. On the 10th of March, an annotated bibliography is required. So in that second stage, for each of the articles that you will have included in your works cited list, you're going to have to produce a brief account of what is in each article. But I want to call to your attention, many articles, but not all scholarly articles, begin with what's called an abstract, right? It says right there, abstract. And in the abstract, typically, but not universally, typically the authors provide what they think of is a helpful snapshot of their research. But it's worth noting, especially when you're dealing with, so professors of medicine, they're all trained as scientists, as natural scientists. Well, it's not quite, professors of medicine are. In the natural sciences, often it's a graduate student who's not even a listed author who produces the abstract. It's someone, there's often a gap between who wrote the article and who wrote the abstract. Sometimes it's even an editor of the journal. So not even an author, not even someone part of the lab. So the abstract is not always, there's no guarantee that the abstract is going to be especially good. And there's a wide range of ways of doing the abstract. So there's on one hand, there's the quality of the abstract. That'll be up to you. On the other hand, just copying the abstract is cheating, it's plagiarism, you get 0. Everybody in your group gets 0 if one of you submits simply a rewording of the abstract. Now, it's a complicated, from my point of view anyway, it's a complicated issue that's not, in fact, unrelated to globalization and to some of the bigger issues that we will be touching on a little bit, at least in this course. The university and the colleges, to my mind, bizarre obsession with plagiarism, the bizarreness of the details of its obsession with plagiarism aren't absolutely unrelated to the content of this course. However, I am constrained by the decisions that the college has taken about these. And in many respects, I agree, for probably different reasons. If you just reword this, so let's say if you copy this, push it through a spin bot, and just change the words from the abstract, that's still plagiarism exactly to the same degree if you just copied and pasted it and presented it as your own work. Don't do it. It'll be super obvious to me. I'm going to look at these articles. I'm going to, read the abstract. And if your annotated bibliography is just a rewording of the abstract, that's going to count as plagiarism. And everyone in your group will get 0 for that part of the assignment. Plus, I have to report you, it's a nightmare. Don't do it. You're going to have to read the article anyway. Read the article and tell me what you think the article is about. That's what I want you to do. The abstract will be a good, I'm not saying don't read the abstract. Reading the abstract is a very good idea. In many cases, reading the abstract first won't make any sense until you start looking at the article. And then as you read the article, it'll be easier to make sense of what the abstract says, but that'll be up to you, how you handle this. At the very least, everyone in the group has to read the article that they've decided to include at the first stage of the of this process. It will turn out to require less work on your part to produce a good final assignment if you spend a little bit more time looking at a bunch of different articles in the beginning, rather than just grab the first article you can find because it's already 11:45 on February 20th and you've run out of time. Spend the time now, take a look at a bunch of articles, make sure that the article makes some sense to you. If you're good at math, I'm not, so if you're good at math, or if the article's full of charts and full of formulas and so on, and you're no good at math, there's a very good chance the article won't mean anything to you, and it'll be super hard for you, needlessly hard for you to do this. There are literally millions of articles that meet the formal criteria for inclusion in this piece of work. Spend time early on finding an article that you have a chance at understanding sufficiently to be able to meet all of the other requirements of this assignment. Now, another thing I want to call to your attention, in almost all scholarly journals, the most typical format is there's 6, 7, 8 articles and then 5 book reviews. Book reviews don't count for this. And every semester it happens, a student takes a look at a journal, they put in the worst version of this is, instead of going to the library webpage, the student just opens up Google, sticks in the title of the course, hits send, a bunch of articles come up, they see an article that has some of the words that they've heard me use, and they just put that in their works cited list. Or they'll see a bunch, one of them is 18 pages, one of them is 24 pages, one of them is 3 pages. I know which one I like the most, the 3-pager. It's not going to count, that'll be 0. And so you'll have wasted 7 minutes to get 0 instead of spending 3 hours to get an A. So take a look, it has to be a full article. Now, in the last number of years, the length of scholarly journal articles has been diminishing. So there are many, many articles now that are 10 pages long. When I was an undergraduate, there were no 10-page articles, or maybe not none, but almost none. 20 pages was the standard size. All articles seem to be somewhere around 20 pages. I think there's all kinds of good reasons, and I think it's a benefit to science and knowledge that there's more flexibility around this, but you're on the hook. You need to take ownership of this task that I'm setting for you. You need to look at these articles, and you're going to have to read it. And and the other people in your group are going to have to read their articles too. So it makes sense to pick a 10-page article instead of a 64-page article. There's some of those out there. So don't make that mistake also. A 64-page article is not going to be helpful to you. If you see an article that you think is really, really interesting, by all means read it. Excellent, that would be great. Don't use it for this assignment though. Read the article, read more stuff. I like reading, and I like it if you read, that'd be great. Don't use it for this assignment though. Pick a 12, 15, 18-page article, a manageable size. These are specialized pieces of work that are almost all of them written for other researchers. The primary audience for this unit of knowledge is researchers and graduate students. It's meant to be read by people who almost certainly have a lot more background information than you have. So there's going to be parts you don't understand. I get that. There's certainly parts I won't understand, right? I don't even know what side of my body my heart is on and this kind of thing. So medicine, right? Not my area of study at all. But there are loads of, I know about exploitation, I know about migrant workers and so on. So there's stuff in there that I have very likely a much stronger background on than you will have. I'm not assuming that you have graduate student experience in any field at all. What I'm looking for is your ability to identify the problems that they're writing about and some of the ways that they're writing about them or conclusions about it and so on. Okay, so now we'll take a look at another one of these things. So now, so higher education institutions as eyes of the state, Canada's international student compliance regime. In this article, they talk a little bit about some of the issues that I was vaguely pointing at about around plagiarism and globalization and so on. But this, unlike the previous article, it's a single author work. In the natural sciences, increasingly, knowledge is produced in groups. And so there are papers, there are scholarly articles that have 80, 90 authors in quantum mechanics and in all these other things. So that's a changing dynamic, a changing background dynamic in knowledge, in higher education knowledge production. It's much less common in the humanities and the social sciences, but multiple authors are fine. And for our purposes, it doesn't really make much of a difference at all. This is a single author. I don't know any, I don't know of the work of any of these people. I picked them, the topic interests me. I will read this eventually. But you can see how higher education institutions as eyes of the state on its own is about issues that we're talking about in our course, international students. You can also see that it would take a fair bit of work to connect this to the previous article. Both of them independently work fine, but they don't work that easily together. So you're gonna, I picked these two to highlight for you the super high likelihood that you're gonna have to coordinate this among yourselves. Yeah,
Is the final assignment, like, I know this is the first of like.
Yeah.
3 or 4. Is it proving a theory or like,
No.
are we, there's a thesis to Altman, or
No.
is it just a similar topic for Altman?
so the final component is going to be in your group, you're going to identify specific places. So you're just gonna comment. Now, I'm not sure that in this interface we can do it. Yeah, you have to open it as a PDF, or I have to open it as a PDF to be able to do this. But when you open it as a PDF, if you right click, you can annotate the text. And so in the final phase of the assignment, you take all of the articles that were included in your works cited list and that you did your annotated bibliography for, and in twos, so you divide yourselves up so that each article has comments from at least 2 students, and those comments make explicit aspects of or connections between either the article and the content of the course, or between 2 or 3 of the articles. So it's reproducing in a way, it's reproducing the preliminary scholarly work that researchers do when they familiarize themselves with the existing literature on a topic that they are engaging in their research on. So as an example, my daughter's a graduate student in global affairs, and she's working with, they're doing a literature review as part of an application for a grant to carry out more research. So to get this grant, they have to demonstrate that they've taken a look at the existing literature on this particular topic. I don't even know what the topic is, but they go through all of the relevant journals and they list all the articles. And this is a standard feature in a great deal of social scientific work. You're doing you're doing a scaled down version of that. And so I'm not asking you to evaluate the quality of the work. I'm asking you to document your own interaction with these pieces of knowledge, and to document it in a way that indicates that you recognize aspects that are going on in the text that connect to either one of the other articles in your group's set of articles, or issues that will have been raised in the readings I've assigned, or the topics I've discussed that we will have discussed in class. I'm going to post, I've got to strip the personal information from it, but I'm going to post examples of each of these of a successful works cited list from an earlier semester, and an annotated bibliography that got a good grade, and the same with the final part. For the works cited list, in the past I didn't require, which I have required this time, a group statement at the works cited list stage of ways that you see the connection among your articles. So I don't have a good version, I don't have a good student sample of that part of the assignment. Now, I just want to show you. So works cited is sometimes, it used to be called a bibliography. And here, in this case, it's called references. And it's a standard part of scholarly production. That's the bottom line. It's more complicated than that. And people are often strategic. Researchers are often strategic about this. The references serve several purposes, which in another context, maybe we could discuss. But the point here is that you're going to produce a small version of this. And one of the strategies that it makes sense for you to consider is to take a look at the reading, the references. So one thing you could do is, I mean, the articles I'm showing you here, well, no, never mind. If, let's say you could choose this article and then find 5 of the articles from this reference list and then work backwards from there. This author, she at least thinks that there's some connection between the articles and books that she lists here and the content of her essay. So you could do that. You could just pick from there and then work backwards from that. Now, I want to encourage you in the strongest terms to think through the nature of the task and the way I'm going to evaluate that task. There's a temptation that is seems more difficult for the diploma students to resist than the degree students to resist. And you're all degree students, but I run into it to a lesser degree still among degree students. And that temptation is to have the way it works as a temptation is students exaggerate their ability to evaluate how much time it's going to take to do this. And they exaggerate their ability to get this done quickly, and they end up running out of time, so they do a shitty job. A shittier job than they're clearly capable of doing, because in a certain way, it looks like it's super easy to do. If you're very familiar with scholarly literature, this is a very straightforward task. So those of you who are upper year students and who have looked at a lot of literature in any particular area, I think you'll find this relatively straightforward. But for those of you who are not in that, for those of you who are in programs that don't involve taking a look at these articles, this is going to be a little bit more, a little bit less familiar. And yeah, so it'll be a little bit less familiar. And so I urge you, especially if you're not familiar with this, to start early, to consult me. So ask me if, you know, at this stage, it looks like you know what you're doing. Use the library. The librarians, you online, if you go to the library website, a little chat bot comes up. They're nearly useless, but you can also get a live librarian to answer questions. So you can type it in. So you can type your questions in. They're very helpful. And also to consult amongst, to coordinate your efforts early within your groups. Group work, as I imagine you all know, can be a challenging thing. Right? Have you done much group work in your different degree programs? What programs are you in?
INS.
You're in INS?
BTM.
And sorry?
BTM.
I don't know what that means.
Business Technology Management.
Okay. Okay. So business technology management. Is that one thing, two things, or three things? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Yeah, so I can't even imagine what your curriculum would look like, but do you do group work in that program? Right, so you'll know what I mean. In some groups, there's 4 of you who are good, and then there's some jerk who will never do anything, won't return emails, and so on. Find out who, first, don't be that person. Second, find out who that person is early on in the group and figure out a way to make sure that you're not tied to an anchor, right? And so if there's a problem in getting someone else in the group to respond, email me. Get in touch with me early so that we can figure out a way to equitably work through the challenges. Each of you is going to share the grade of the work together, and some of that grade depends on your ability to navigate the connection among the workers, the knowledge workers, which is essentially, which is what you'll be doing here. And part of the pedagogical value of this, one of the ways that this kind of exercise helps students to understand the phenomena, that's how these articles work. So even in a single authored paper, the way journal articles, almost always, these are all broad generalizations. This one, though, is very, very broad. Legitimate, good journals have an editorial committee. And if you, so this article, I forget this is the higher education one. The way it works is this author writes this article and then she sends it to this journal. So Globalization, Societies, and Education. And the editor of the journal sees what the title is, and then they have a roster of other faculty members from all kinds of different universities who are specialists in some aspect of what the title says. And so the editor would send a copy of this article to 5 or 6 of these experts, and they would read the article and they would write a report and send it back to the journal to say, no, this person, this is not relevant to today, or this is good, but they need to consider this. And then most of the articles, I mean, it varies from journal to journal, but most of the articles don't get accepted. Some of them will they get past this first stage. And then typically the journal editor will send the reports that these experts wrote to the author and ask the author to either change their article or go home, basically. I mean, it depends. And power relations are also operate in the background here too. So it's not, the peer review is mythologized a little bit in the popular media. Peer review is better than just blindly accepting anything that's produced, but peer review has its drawbacks as well. But the point is that your cooperative, your relative cooperation on this exercise is a version of the way all of this knowledge is generated in these specialized articles and the production of books and the carrying out of laboratory work. Certainly in the 21st century, I think that it's always been this way, but absolutely certainly in the 21st century, knowledge is produced in a social context. Scientific, scholarly knowledge, all of it, every bit of it is produced in a social context that involves the collaboration of many, many people. And so everything you read, all the textbooks you read, web pages, I mean, there's loads of shitty little web pages that are just some guy in his basement. But most of the web pages that get a lot of traffic are the result of collaborative labor of experts from different sorts of experts, and they jointly produce this, and they train us to recognize arguments and forms of claims in ways that are historically, that change historically. So scholars, new scholars who are entering the field this week, so people who were university, there were no computers. Basically, there were no computers in the library when I started my undergraduate degree. So there was nowhere to go. We had to go through cards and so on. And knowledge, the resulting knowledge in the changes through which this knowledge is produced and disseminated change over time. And there are loads of advantages and loads of unexpected advantages and loads of unexpected disadvantages. But in 2023, this is how knowledge gets produced cooperatively like that. And so for that reason, the same kind of motivation that in a BTM program, I imagine the kinds of jobs that your credential leads to involve group work, not scholarly group work necessarily, but business group work where you're part of a team, and whatever BTM people do for money, you're likely to do it in a group, and you're responsible to a superior who is him or herself responsible, and so on. So this being able to play nice in the sandbox is increasingly a necessary feature of more and more forms of employment. So, and you need to figure out a balance between telling dad, me, and sorting it out yourselves, right? So don't wait until the middle of April to say that, oh, yeah, we sent Ted an email on the 1st of February and we never heard from him since. It's way too late in April. If Ted's a problem that you can't fix, let me know and I will figure it out. It's my responsibility ultimately if the group dynamic breaks down completely. But it's your responsibility as members of the group to not have that happen. So we have to split the difference somehow. In the professional world, your manager is going to want you to be able to be part of a group like a grown-up and put up with crap from other people, but recognize when a certain line has been crossed, and your manager doesn't want you to come to her every time someone brings you a coffee with milk instead of cream, and or this kind of thing. You need to be able to distinguish between you problems and me problems. So the stakes are low. No one's going to get fired over this. But if you wait until April, you're going to get a 0 on part of your assignment, and it's not necessary. So, okay. Any questions about this? Yeah,
So what I'm understanding is the works cited list
yeah,
will have all the articles which all of us as a group have decided on, and then a brief connection between them, which
yeah.
is then expanded upon in the article commentary, which is due in April, right?
You're not going to be committed at the end of the semester to your initial understanding of what the connection is between those assignments. I think that, or between those articles, I think there's a very strong likelihood that that's what's going to happen, but you won't be held to that. You can find brand new connections, other connections. We're going to cover quite a bit more material as the semester goes on. And so new avenues will open up for you, and there'll be a wider range of kinds of things that you might be able to see connecting your articles. But if you choose the strategy I suggest, you take a look at an article and you drill down and you find other articles in the list of references, that's one starting point for you, where you'll know from the beginning that at least one expert in this field thinks that there's some kind of connection between the article this article and the articles in the reference list. So
We'll comment on our own article,
yes,
and then they'll comment on their own article, and then we just compile all the comments on the
No.
article.
well, that's one way of doing it. Yes. Yeah, so but if there's 6 people, 6 articles, each article needs at least comments from at least 2 different students. And then so you, as a group, you distribute that work as you see fit.
That's not until April, right?
Yeah, that's not until April, right? For now, you need to find, well, you need to wait a few minutes for me to put you into a group. Then you need to get together in your group, find the same number of articles as there are people in your group, and then imagine some way that those articles are related to each other. Now, it has to be substantive though, so it can't just be, well, they were sourced, like you can't just say what I just said. You need to have looked at those other articles and figured out some way why, what it is about what's in those other articles that led her to say that. In this article, I wonder, there might be examples of this. Sometimes in the That's not. Like she might quote Hamlet in the thing and then have a reference to Shakespeare. That'll turn out to be useless for you, right? So the kinds of reasons, or here, so Global Affairs Canada, building on success, this is not going to be a journal article. This is a government publication. So you need to make sure this though, an international journal for critical geographies, that absolutely is a journal. And so that article very likely has information in it. And one of the awesome things about the internet is often, but unfortunately not always, these are hyperlinked. So you click on this and it'll go get this article for you. So I'll spare you the uphill twice to school thing. You have to open this up, and some articles, the references are linked to footnotes and endnotes, and it'll even link it back to the place in the article where this is referred to. So it'll take you right, and the article will say, in 2019, Gaman wrote the stupidest article I've ever read. It'll never say it exactly like that, but it might give you an indication that this isn't helpful or not immediately helpful. But even that you can turn to your own advantage, because an initially count. Let me get back to the screen here. Sorry. One of the features about scholarly literature that people who are not immersed in scholarly literature sometimes have trouble recognizing is that the best thing, but what scholars like the most is disagreement. Scholars don't like agreement. So they're going to try to find an argument, or they're going to try to find an assertion that someone defended, and they're going to try to show why that was wrong or mistaken or something along those lines. So in the references, there's likely many references that have been that are in support of a conclusion that the author disagrees with. There's disagreement. It's antagonistic in a more literal way, perhaps. But so you need to be able to recognize that that's what's going on. So some of these sources will be used to defend her position, and some of these sources will be used to define the position or positions against which she's arguing. So given the title of this, the Global Affairs Canada thing, it probably says something that she tries to demonstrate is either untrue or some version of that. And it would be included in order to justify her claim that the government has said this, but they're doing something else, for example, something along those lines. And so you want to, this is an example of the sort of thing where if you spend even just 5 or 10 minutes early on, you won't then waste an hour later finding out that you've less efficiently spent your time. The way scholars apprentice to their work is they end up reading a lot more material than they ever use, typically anyway, than they ever use in any one of these bits of work. And so that she's got all these things, she's been reading this stuff for a long time, and you just store this. And some of it, you end up reading a journal article that you'll never use, but it does a couple of things. One of the things that it does is it reinforces for you, one of the ways that it's virtually necessary for people who are going to end up producing these sorts of documents is it gives them an idea of the style they have to write in. And so the more familiar you become with this style, the easier it is for you to produce your knowledge in that style. And so that if in the same way as if you work in advertising, you learn to write advertising copy. That's not a natural, spontaneous thing. The more you read it, the more you apply yourself to it, you learn and you internalize these patterns of writing. If you go on to get a PhD in sociology, that's basically the only way you can learn how to write these articles efficiently, is to read lots and lots and lots of these articles and then start writing bits about it. Most of our students don't go on to get a PhD in sociology, but familiarity with this general strategy of research is a background that's very widely shared in the 21st century networked world. The general networking mode of generating knowledge and disseminating knowledge, that's how knowledge works, at least in the 21st century. Okay, any questions out there in Cloudland about this or about anything else? Okay, so I'll sit for a second. So to reset, at the end of later today, I'm going to set the groups up, and it'll be set up through Blackboard. So you'll be able to see in Blackboard who is in your group, and you'll be able to start coordinating your efforts. I'm going to reach out in a week or so to make sure that everyone it has started to row the boat a little bit. And so I'm going to try to do a better job of this than I have in previous semesters, of regularly touching base with all the groups to make sure that things aren't off track already. So, okay, I'm going to take a break then. And look at that, an hour exactly. So I'm going to take a break, and then we're going to turn to the history of migration to Canada, culminating hopefully today, but probably not. Probably it'll take two lectures to do. Okay, so I will be back in a second. Are you coming back? Yes. Okay, good. You don't have to. I hope you do. But...
How long is the break for?
10 minutes, let's say.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm done with my 20-page literature review, so I'm not exactly ready.
For what course?
I'm in interdisciplinary, so
Yeah.
it's the research project, capstone.
Oh, what year are you in?
Next year is my last year,
Right.
so
So what's your topic?
I'm a makeup artist, so I did CTM here as well.
I'm sorry, you're a what?
I'm a makeup artist, so
Oh,
I did
okay.
cosmetics.
Oh,
here
is that
as well.
right?
Yes. So I did mine on Canadian consumers' opinions towards cosmetic and testing.
Huh,
So science and ethics, right?
right.
So
Because they're just passing legislation now, aren't they,
Yeah,
to ban?
it's not exactly going well, but they are trying.
In what way is it not going well? There's resistance or?
I introduce you to Doug Ford.
Really?
A little bit. It's not.
Is it Ontario legislation or
it doesn't have to
national?
be. It's Ontario legislation
Oh.
for, like, there's no federal body that covers it.
Okay, right.
It's there's
Consumer,
no- It's a private organization that says they work with the government,
right,
which the legislation is kind of up in the air. There's no official law banning any cosmetic testing, right? But if you go to the United Kingdom, if you go to the European Union, New Zealand, Australia, whatever, even Mexico just banned cosmetic,
right.
and we are still.
But do they carry that out in jurisdictions where it's
In
allowed?
the European Union, Australia, New Zealand, yes.
Yeah.
It's still a little messy because it's only been, 2 decades since they passed that, so it's still like, there's some areas of concern. But like, California is pretty strict about it, certain parts of Brazil are pretty strict about it, and yet Canada is so behind.
Huh,
Very
do, is a lot of makeup produced in Canada?
No,
Right,
a lot of it's
Oh, so this would ban even the importing of makeup?
It would have to.
Okay, right.
For animal activists to be happy about it, yes.
Right, yeah, because otherwise, if we don't make any, then if we pass a law saying we can't make any more, so
But
who
that would
cares?
cut off most of, like, that would probably cut off a lot of Canada's major retailers.
Right,
Like shoppers or.
Sure. yeah,
And like, it's a $13 billion industry, right? It's very big.
right. And it's going to increase the cost, at least in the
Yeah.
short term.
I mean, there are very few Canadian cosmetic brands that are produced here, very few.
Right,
So, yeah, that's not happening for a while, but I wanted to see how much people know about it, because it seems like Canadians don't really know it.
right.
Which my research was right.
Yeah.
It's an interesting topic.
I don't remember your name,
Amanda.
Amanda. Okay. Amanda Ramkaram, right? Yeah. And it's Advidi, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
When you read
2024.
you have a work time or?
Yeah,
Work time all,
I think in fall.
yeah. So like if you in your last year or so, they'll ask you to do the work term and then they'll ask you to come back to school, so you have to write a paper.
I think that's a good idea.
I mean, I don't wanna pretend to graduate and then go to the workforce and have a paper to write with them. It's not my preference.
Yeah. But we want it because we don't, we need for largely bad reasons, we need you to graduate. We need you to graduate in some ways more than we need you to get a job for our own data and another example of how the cart gets put before the horse.
I'm 4 years into this is my entire education. It's a little too late to jump ship.
Yeah, well, but yeah,
So it'll be my first time like having a review, like as an essay, like I've done reviews before, I've been in groups before, but like as a scholarly essay, it's my first time. So
Yeah.
I'm pretty excited.
oh, good. I was sure you were going the other direction with that.
It's not a full essay at least.
It's a start, like I've never done anything like this before, like it's my program is mostly business. So we just basically get together and think about product ideas to try and make different products. We price stuff accordingly, but then never like this, so pretty interesting.
I just did a literature review and I was doing a lot of more sciencey terms on like in vitro testing, in vivo testing. I'm not a science major. I'm so far, but it took a while to like understand things and once I did, I got the hang of it. I'm better with the ethical stuff on my topic.
And who's teaching the research course this semester?
Jeffrey Ferguson.
Wow, yeah,
I had Dr. Tremblay last semester.
Tanya,
Yes.
Yeah.
She's lovely. And she's
she's
my program coordinator. She's lovely.
Yeah.
She's such a gem. I'm like, thank God I have somebody who knows what I'm supposed to be doing right now.
yeah,
It's just a very big project, so like, I know the page count's gonna go up as my semester continues.
right,
I'm already at 20 right now. I'm really hoping I can keep it under 50.
pages, yeah. Well, beyond a certain fairly minimal level, it's harder to write it short than it is to write it long.
It's easy to just keep going.
Yes.
And then you keep going in circles.
For some people, for many people,
Yeah,
yeah, for sure for me.
Usually when it includes statistics and stuff for the project, like for the stuff we had to do, we had to also look up articles like this. And since it's business related, there are like tons of statistics. There's like just 4 pages worth of them just talking about math. And I don't know whether to include it or exclude it because I don't understand what they're saying. And then sure, it has a value, but I just want one final statement at the end, is like, yes, this is what we prove, like to summarize the 4 pages of math they have.
Yeah,
Business journals are like, I mean, it also depends like what subject you're looking at, like, is it more?
No,
social
because
sciences or-
usually they just go, why we decided this trend was good for this time period. And because they want to make sure that everything is factual, they include data from like, we started seeing an upside to this product in this time. Because of this, we assumed this. Our assumptions were based on all this, and then 4 pages later.
I would be sleeping through me. I promise you that. I promise you that. Are you doing the summer semester as well?
No, I already did 4 semesters back to back,
Yeah.
and so this summer would be a break.
That's good. I'm doing only 2 in the summer, I think, and then I have the work term prep thing, it's a workshop.
All my other friends, they're doing electives in the summer.
Yeah, I'm trying to push one course right now. I really don't want to do it right now. I want to finish my capstone right now, because it's taking me forever. That's a lot of stress. Tanya was like, oh, you could go for your master's after, and I'm like, hello, no. No. And do I have the grades for it? Sure. Do I have the patience? No. My parents are like, yeah, find your parents to finance you through. Good luck with that. This is also my second program, right? So.
yeah.
pressure loss.
And you did makeup here?
Yes, 3rd floor D building is the cosmetic labs.
Right.
So if you ever pass by. I graduated during COVID though, which was not ideal.
Did you start during COVID?
No, I started this semester before COVID.
Right,
And when I graduated, there were very few jobs, right? Makeup stores weren't opening,
Right.
and I could go into retail, sure. Or I could do another 2 years, advance my education, my career prospects, and maybe get into the workforce later. So
right.
hopefully when I graduate, things are a little bit better. It's
Well, on the news yesterday, even, they were saying that employment is declining, that unemployment is declining, and that there are lots and lots of jobs that are open. So for whatever that's worth, I think it's not quite exactly what it seems like, but
during 21,
yeah.
summer 2021, when I graduated, it would have been worse, I'm
Well,
sure.
and yeah, and there are certain fields for sure where we're devastated by COVID and by the restrictions due to COVID.
Even my brother, he's an automotive, was laid off twice. And I was like, you work at Canadian Tire, they need you. He's like, apparently they don't.
Yeah, wow.
Stuff needs to be open for them to hire people, right? If stuff is not open, then they can't hire people.
It was just unfortunate. I felt bad for him, but automotive, you would think is maybe more secure, maybe a little more secure, but
My dad worked in an automotive company in the Gulf. Like he was a manager, but then the people under like employees as such, they were laid off by like, I think my dad used to be like, for a month, they used to be given a quota, but like this many people need to be removed. So you need to allocate what people you need, what jobs they need to do, and everybody else can go out because Gulf was facing a crisis during that time. So my dad was like, either we spend 4 years in the Gulf for your education, or we move out now and then figure it out later. We did the second one. Because nobody likes and because even though my dad's a manager, his boss could be like, I think we don't need you.
Oh, yeah.
And then my education in the Gulf would be like disrupted, right? Because I can't continue in the college if my family's not there.
yeah, sure.
Or like it would be more expensive for me to figure it out.
Right?
Huh?
You were all there at the time, though.
Where? In the Gulf,
Yeah.
all 3 of us were together, and then we moved together. Like
Here.
But there was a college that you could take a course.
I could, but then
yeah.
education in the Gulf, especially Oman, like if it's not in like a bigger country, like let's say Dubai or UAE or Qatar or something like that, then it's better to go outside right, rather to India or like Canada or somewhere else, it's better to go outside there to stay in the Gulf because they don't offer citizenship very easily.
No,
It's a very long process, and the easiest way to get citizenship, I would think, was to get married. Like anybody, it doesn't matter who.
That's what my mom did. That was your brother.
in Oman,
Yeah, in all of the Gulf countries, I rather need to let's say I'm an Indian. If I had to get married to, let's say, a Canadian, then I'll be guaranteed citizenship
in Oman.
in Oman.
Really?
Yeah, you need to marry.
Are you sure?
Yes.
It could be Canadian too.
No, not Canadian. You need to be
Okay.
an Emirati or
Yeah,
like
yeah,
an Omani.
yeah.
The citizen of that country
Yeah.
to be accepted
Yeah.
as a citizen.
That's basically how my mom got in here. She was getting deported because she was on her student visa and it was up. She never went to college or anything, but she was here on high school. And she was about to get deported. She turns to my dad, who's been dating her maybe 3 months. And she's like, let's get married. 33 years.
Yeah.
They're doing well.
Yeah.
But we're staying. I'm here.
Yeah. But even that now, and this is part of the course content, the notion of marriage and the reality of marriage as on the one hand, a legal institution, on the other hand, a social institution, and a component of society, all of those, like the story you just told us is part of the history of marriage. Marriage in the West anyway, originates largely as a property, as a legal property related relationship that is only secondarily, but is secondarily connected to children
I can't
and
imagine.
has nothing to do with feelings or emotions.
I mean, my parents were in love, so it's not, but.
Right, but I mean historically, so medieval Europe. Not that they were or weren't, but that's not how it was
I
understood.
can't imagine, it was pretty fast from what I understood of how she became a citizen. I can't imagine how much slower or faster it might be now.
Yeah, 30 years ago, huh?
90s, yeah.
What's that?
91.
Yeah,
But my dad came up, was sponsored through like his family, but when my mom tried to get sponsored, it got harder. She were getting slightly tighter.
right.
So my dad came up in the 70s and my mom came up in the 90s and I was her late 80s and I was like,
Did you say it's from Guyana?
my dad's from Guyana, my mom's from Trinidad.
From Trinidad, right?
So, they're definitely not the most like wealthy countries. They don't exactly have the best, migrants aren't exactly the most skilled of workers because it's a lot of general labor down there. So like, if you are coming up, it's either sponsored or marriage, which sponsored, great, but like,
Yeah,
there's very few people that'll come up from Guyana or Trinidad that are like skilled workers. There's not really colleges or universities.
no, but elites in those countries
Sure, you're a medical doctor.
go to England, become doctors, and then go back to Trinidad and go back to Guyana to be doctors there. But often what happens, I don't know specifically
No,
about
you're
Trinidad and Guyana, but in many non-top 50 economic countries, the elites send their children to go to medical school in Paris or wherever on the idea that they'll come back to rejoin the elite, but they stay in Paris because they meet someone and they, and also because if you study medicine, being able to work in a hospital with the newest equipment is much more appealing and is much more consistent with the training you just received than it would be to go back to a country where the infrastructure isn't as suited to what you've just been learning about, and your status is so high even here. So
It's pretty much as you described. There's really only one university in the Caribbean, University of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
But you. leave
University of
Iowa,
West Indies.
You leave, yes.
Yeah.
You leave home, right? You leave the country, and as soon as you have that degree, you're like, well, I can maybe get out of here. And a lot of people don't want to come back. I don't blame them. The countries aren't exactly in great shape.
Yeah. But and there's sort of overlapping dynamics too. You leave when you're 18, and when you're 18, for me anyway, for everybody, it feels like I still, in lots of ways, feel like on the inside, I'm the same person as I was 15 years ago and when I was 17. And no matter how far back I try to imagine myself, it feels like me. And so you're 18, you think you know everything. And then you go and you're in Paris or London or Montreal or Toronto. And then 5 years later, you still think you know everything. You still think that you're you. And so your commitments are going to have been influenced along the way by what you've now seen. And yeah, I think plenty do go back for sure, but plenty don't.
COVID actually has done something good for the country, is people have now been able to access online education. So my cousin did an Oxford degree, like a full degree online for COVID.
From Oxford,
Yeah,
wow,
online. She couldn't do that before.
yeah,
because different country. But now she has a nicer paying job. She works for a government official. Like I'm like, it's opened some opportunities. But like people, if they are ambitious enough to get a degree, most of the time they don't want to come back.
yeah, I don't know about most of the time, there would be data on that, plus, yeah, so it's definitely widely understood to be a major dynamic at work in global migration is the unequal distribution of opportunities. And so, I mean, some of the charts on one of the things. So he said he was coming back, but he left his bag, but I'm gonna get going. I think we went over 10 minutes. So I'm gonna now turn to, I'm gonna try to.
It's more common for people to leave and then never go back because because the opportunities like career wise, like money wise, like you definitely get paid more for your degree and your qualification in another country rather than if you go back home for the
It
same
depends on the working
one.
country, but yeah, like definitely from like my background, people don't want to go back. It's not. You're better.
Right.
As like go back as in staying there permanently, but then if you like I would love to go back for a vacation or something, but if you're asking me to stay there and then work there, it would be harder for me because I the stuff which I've studied is not applicable here in the country where I'm going back to. What I'm studying is applicable for where I studied it.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, yeah.
For Canada, certainly, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Bruce calling article connecting. Okay, there's one more component I want to say about the, so we're back on now. We're back to the last comment I want to make, or the last set of comments I want to make. If you're having trouble imagining some of the issues you can use, one strategy I recommend and that I've tried to make possible, well, here, let's take a look. So we'll take a look at a couple of pages from the 2022 annual report to Parliament on immigration. And we'll quickly look at a bunch of the different issues just to put onto the table some of the several different components that the government puts forward as its justification for its current immigration policies. And so every part of that is itself open to disagreements on. I've forgotten your name, I'm afraid.
Jamal.
It is Jamal. Okay, I should have guessed because that's what I thought. So we get immigration accounts for as much as 90% of the labor force growth in Canada and approximately 75% of population growth. So those are demographic components and economic components that are used by the Canadian government to justify the overall level of immigration to Canada and the distribution within that overall level of Canada. And in order to land on that policy, and that's part of the background to that first chapter, ideas, interests, and institutions. How does this policy get formulated? Who is in favor of that policy? Who is against that policy? And why is it that at certain periods in Canadian history, immigration is resisted or immigration is less resisted? And immigration from where? So then the next slide, international students are getting closer and closer to the center of Canada's immigration policy. They're never going to be right at the center. I can't imagine any conditions under which they'd be right at the center. But if you look back 15 years, ago, international students would not figure in a high-level overview of this kind of document where the government would justify its position. We're probably not going to take a look at this semester, but international students were moved to this much closer, much more important place in Canadian immigration policy around 2015, when there was a fairly major shift in Canadian immigration law. And it was, the scholars and policy proponents disagree about how to analyze the relative weights of the considerations, but accompanying this expansion in international students was, on the one hand, the deregulation of tuition fees, and on the other hand, the extension of work permits to these international students. And so international students are also workers, and increasingly international students come to Canada and they work legally, so that employers are benefiting from this new stream of potential employees. So all of these are different components of aspects that you might consider. And then finally, in 2021, this is the order of the number of people who were accepted as permanent residents to Canada. So India is first, the People's Republic of China, the Philippines, Nigeria, France, US, Brazil, Iran, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. And so you see significant difference, right? 32% of all new permanent residents come from India. And there are all kinds of ways that scholars try to understand that. A fairly new development in the scholarship of immigration to a very large degree, the scholarship of immigration in Canada, but also in lots and lots of other places, was driven by what one critical scholar has identified as, what did she call it now? Nationalist, just through the scope of the country, so that they would take a look at this, and what they would see is 73,000 males have come to Canada, and what they didn't notice is that 73,000 males left India. What's going on in India? What's going on in China? What's going on in the Philippines that many people are leaving there, period? Not just that they're coming here, but why are they leaving India? Why are they leaving China? Why are they leaving, any of these places? Is there something going on there that is generating that? So these are the rough, the term that's used in the scholarship is push-pull. What's pushing the migrants to leave where they're from, and what's pulling them towards where they're going? Okay, so these are just some of the ways that you can consider it. So if you're in a group with someone from one of these places, that might provide you with some extra information that would allow you to narrow the search of your literature. Okay, so, but now I want to go to, so the slides that I'm going to use now were prepared by Lauren Foster, who's a professor at York. And he's the York Research Chair in Black Canadian Studies. But he's been a scholar of immigration for a number of years. Okay, so let me just make sure I'm staying on track here. What time is it? It's 12:19. What time do we go to? 1:30? 1:25. Okay, so an hour. Great. So we're going to take a look at the major historical trends. And from a methodological point of view, that is to say, so let me take a step back. I want to link up the nature of the group literature review, the interdisciplinary nature of the purpose of that review to try to justify to some degree to demonstrate the importance of a historical approach to these issues. If we take a look at the history of migration to Canada, there are patterns can be discerned in that, and the social dynamics that were occurring in Canadian society, Canada's place in the world, two different things. So the social dynamics internal to Canada on the one hand, and Canada's changing position in the world, and the changing nature of the world within which Canada's position was changing, intersect in ways that scholars have attended to over the years. And taking a look at those shifts under some circumstances can provide us with a range of questions that we would want to ask about what's going on today in order to have a more complete picture of what's going on today. So Foster posits that there are four major historical trends. First, starting roughly around the end of the 19th century, there's a slow and then a more rapid transformation of the economic basis for Canadian society. The economic production in Canada shifts from a largely agricultural and resource extraction base early on in at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century. And we get by the end of, so by 1995, so you say 1895, we have a largely agricultural society that's transforming itself slowly from a subsistence-based agricultural with a small amount of surplus production destined for international trade, largely destined for international trade, some to the United States, most of it to Britain. And some of the economy is based on Britain's global empire. And so British trade with Asia and with India, some of it is beginning to shift overland across Canada, and the Canadian Railway was in part organized to take pressure off of the other route that Britain had to access the extraction of wealth from India and the Asian subcontinent, and the complication and the expense associated with the diminishing but still considerable power of the Ottoman Empire, which was geographically in between Britain and Asia. So the development of Canada was in part a response to and understood as a kind of economic opportunity for the British capitalist class to be able to continue to increasingly generate profits from its global trade. Canada then just becomes a train station to a large degree. So we get the shift from 1895 to 1995 is a shift from a pre-industrial to a post-industrial one. In between World War I and the 1970s, the Canadian economy is slowly transformed to an extent anyway. It remains up until this day much more strongly, much less economically diversified than, for example, the United States or even England, France, and many other of the major countries. We depend on oil and timber. We still depend on oil and timber and mining to a significantly higher degree than many of the other similarly wealthy countries if you compare us in terms of GDP per capita. And that has certain consequences for, at least arguably, there are economists and sociologists and policy people who analyze this in different ways, but everyone agrees, largely speaking, that that's roughly the shape of the Canadian economy. But in between 1895 and 1995, there was a period of 100 years where especially in Ontario, especially in Southern Ontario, but in pockets also across Canada, a manufacturing sector was established. And Southern Ontario, for much of the, starting mostly during World War II, the manufacturing capacity in Ontario expanded dramatically. And then after World War II, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, manufacturing capacity and productivity increased. And then in the 1970s, at the same time as the nature of the connection among these events is debated and disagreed by the scholars who attend to this, but associated with, let's say, the energy crisis of the so-called energy crisis of the late 1970s, early 1980s, and also either related to it directly or indirectly, either as cause or as effect, a dramatic decrease in the profitability of North American industrial shares led to a free trade agreement, the consequence of which was, and arguably the goal, but at least the consequence of which was a fairly dramatic deindustrialization of the Ontario economy and the Canadian economy. And so we have a pre-industrial economy in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, and then we have a post-industrial economy following the free trade agreement, and then especially the North American free trade agreement. Okay, so let's take a look then. There were three phases according to Foster. Foster divides the period into three phases: a closed policy that was explicitly white supremacist and Christian. So that Canada, the elites in charge of Canada, that is the people who were elected to Parliament, the people who wrote newspaper articles, the people who organized universities, who ran the churches. The Christian church was still, early on in this period, was still a very influential force in Canadian society. The Catholic Church, primarily in Quebec, and the different Protestant denominations in Ontario, and then as Canada expanded in west in Manitoba and Alberta and so on, and in the Maritimes also, the Catholic Church and the Protestant, so the Christian churches had a significant, how significant, open to debate, but definitely a significant influence in forming public opinion in Canada. And that public opinion characterized Canadian society as a Christian society. And that manifested itself in immigration policy by looking for people who could continue, who could, the description of it was they were looking for people who would fit into Canada. And what they meant by fit in was be the same as the people who these opinion formers thought of as being real Canadians, what the essence of Canada was. And so primarily they looked for English-speaking people, and in the late 19th century, early 20th century, that meant primarily people from England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and secondarily from a few other places. And also French immigrants were also, to a lesser degree, recruited and exclusively for, almost exclusively for Quebec, which was part of Canada, of course. And there's a circularity that's built into this view. We see Canadian public opinion understood Canada to be a white country, a Christian country. They recruit more whites, and more in particular Christian whites, to come to Canada, which reinforces that very understanding of Canada. So there's a circular kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, a dynamic going on at that time, against the background of other people from other places looking to move around. So at the end of World War II, for a number of reasons that we're not going to have the time, we're going to have to skip over that fairly quickly, but at the end of World War II, as the European economy, so the European economy was in many ways like a number of other places, but the European economy, so up until World War II, the majority of migrants to Canada came from Europe. The European economy was devastated by World War II. Because of World War II, immigration levels dropped dramatically. But as World War II, after World War II ended, migration from Europe picked up because the European economy was devastated. But to a great degree, through the Marshall Plan, U.S. capital investment in Europe increased dramatically, and the European economy recovered very, very quickly. And following the late 1950s, all the way up to the 1980s, especially in Northern Europe, but in all of Europe, the GDP grew at a very dramatic and sustained rate. In some ways, it was the best 30 years in European history. And so there was a great deal of wealth that was being generated. Population, basically the population dynamic followed, not quite one-to-one, but it followed this recovery of the economy. Births dropped dramatically during World War II for a number of reasons, and they began to pick up again. And as the economy recovered, migration to Canada and to everywhere else, but we're concerned with Canada for now, migration to Canada from Europe dried up. And the Canadian economy, though, it also picked up, but our population growth wasn't keeping up with the economic growth. So employers were putting pressure on the government to increase migration flows. And employers were largely, what drives employment is not just the personal wishes of the people who happen to run the country. There's and here again, there's a great deal of theoretical, methodological disagreement, but to some degree, these economic decisions exist independently of the social, to some degree. They exist independently of the social conditions in which they're being experienced. So the factory owner might well personally be a white supremacist, but if he or she has a back order that would allow them to make a profit of $1 million, and the only people that he or she can hire aren't from Sweden or whatever country they might feel is appropriate for Canada under whatever circumstances, either they find people to do that work or they go out of business. And so some people, I guess, went out of business, but the drive for profits, the economic drive, successfully overcame whatever reluctance might have existed otherwise. And the Canadian government, in response to employer organization demands, expanded the scope of the places from which they were going, they recruited workers. So we went from a closed policy to an open policy. Canada in practice first, and then officially rejected the white settler policy. They removed ethnic and racial criteria from the standards that were applied to the recruitment of immigrants to Canada. And then finally, starting in 1978, restrictive policy where a more sophisticated, a more time-consuming, and a more targeted approach to selecting migrants to Canada was implemented in what is it's 76, 77, 78 is really the start of the contemporary modern immigration system to Canada, with in particular a system of points associated to certain desired characteristics in migrants. And these points were calibrated to maximize the extent to which the migrants would be able to quickly integrate into the Canadian economy on the one hand, and Canadian society on the other. And one of the central methodological challenges in the social sciences most generally is to understand the nature of the relationship between the economy and society. Almost everyone acknowledges, almost all academics acknowledge what all human beings experience. And that is that the social and the economic are deeply intertwined in many, many, many different aspects of our lives. That's true in Canada, that's true around the world, that's true everywhere, and that's true seemingly in all periods of time. How do economic considerations interact and respond to and cause and are caused by social considerations? And so we get this restrictive policy that was begun rather than just a blanket open policy. A restrictive policy is begun in 1978, leading eventually to the refinements, the fine tuning of that in the 1990s, and then again in 2002. In 2002, well, we'll get there probably next week. Okay. So 1867, I briefly gave an account of 1867 when Confederation, with the Confederation Act, whatever, when July 1st, 1867, Canada, the Dominion of Canada is established through an act of Parliament in Great Britain, and we begin to set our own immigration policy, our own national immigration policy. And from the very beginning, from 1867 to 1913, it's driven explicitly by an understanding of the core of what the core economic drivers were at the time, and that involved that importantly involved in complicated ways US designs on the rest of North. So in 1867, Canada ends at the border of Ontario. Manitoba is not yet part of it. Alberta, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and British Columbia are not yet part of Canada. They're still British territories. And the United States has its sights on that. Everyone understands there's already a very good understanding of the resource potential of that enormous amount of land, which is in some ways more accessible to the Western states of the United States than it is to Montreal, which was at the time in 1867, the financial center of Canada. Toronto was a secondary city relative to Montreal as recently as the 1950s, maybe even the 1960s. But either way, Montreal and Toronto, both of them are a long, long, long way away. And of course, you'll be aware at some level that transportation technology at this time is very different from what's available today. There was no railway yet in 1867. And in part, the railway was built in order to stake a claim for the Canadian provinces and also to a secondary degree for Britain to prevent the United States from staking a claim to the same part of the planet. And so capital was invested, initially capital to a great degree raised in Great Britain, but that through the vicissitudes, through the relative inefficiencies of the capitalist marketplace, an inefficiency that capitalists themselves on the one hand acknowledge and on the other hand often turn to their advantage, right? Prices go up and down. And if you invest at the right time, when prices are on the way up, and if you sell before the prices come down, you realize a profit. If you get it wrong, you lose your money. And a lot of people got it wrong the first few times with investing in railroads in Canada. But eventually, a railroad gets built, and the creation of the Canadian National Railway pretty much put an end to any sustained attempt on the part of the United States to lay territorial claim to what became the western part of Canada. So the railway was a capital investment in securing that land for the benefit of the elites in Canada in the East, secondarily for the continued geopolitical ambitions of Great Britain. So capital investment, but in order to realize that capital, first of all, the railway had to be built, that required labor. And then goods had to be produced on the land over which that railway passed in order to, in part, justify the expense of the railway and to generate more profits for the people who were investing that capital. So people were needed to farm that land, which consistent with the white supremacist view that was that explicitly characterized the attitude of the elites in Canada at the time, this land was paradoxically and contradictorily seen as empty, except from a resource point of view, but also seen, and this is the contradiction, it was seen as empty, but it was also seen as having pesky natives on there who were interfering in a variety of different ways with the nation building goals of the elites in the East. So they saw that when it was in ways, insofar as it was convenient, they understood the land to be empty, so they didn't have to pay for it. And insofar as it was convenient, they saw the First Nations people who were living there and who had been living there for thousands of years as interlopers somehow. And so the RCMP, there was the Northwest Mounted Police at the time, they weren't yet called the RCMP, but the Northwest Mounted Police were sent out to wherever settlements arose and conflicts were generated by the effectively the invasion of the white settlers who migrated to Canada and then began to populate the West. Whenever interference with that project was encountered, the Northwest Mounted Police acted as an invading force to protect the property rights of the white settlers. So Canada moves west in this period and largely following prices, global prices, there's sort of peaks and valleys of the expansion to the expansion of immigration to settle this part of the country. So it's worth noting that in 1911 and in 1913, totals were reached that are only now being matched. But the real the significance of that isn't clear until you realize that the population of the planet has more than doubled since then. And the population of Canada, so 330,000 in 1911 represented something like 6 or 7% of the total Canadian population. So now there's 30 million Canadians, but back then I think there was maybe 6 million Canadians. So that's a much higher percentage of the total population. The perception, the accurate perception was Canada was empty. There was no one here. Even if they had, which they didn't, included the existing Indigenous population, relative to the economic purposes for which that land was understood to be destined, the population was much too low to sustain the kind of economic activity that was anticipated and that was required in order to realize the value of the capital that had been invested. Okay. And as the demand for labor increases and the stock of available settlers from Northern Europe dries up, the search expands a little bit, and settlers from Southern Europe and from Eastern Europe are begin to be recruited. So Italian and Portuguese and Spanish settlers and Polish and Czech settlers, well, they weren't Czech yet, but Polish and Eastern Europeans began to be recruited with certain kinds of challenges. The linguistic, it represents a linguistic challenge, as many students at Seneca understand. The challenge is that the people here, you're at an immediate disadvantage when you come to a place where there's a shared linguistic background that you don't yet have. So for children, it's not a problem at all. Or it's not nearly the same problem. If you're a 4-year-old Polish kid and you come to Canada, or Sri Lankan or whatever, you come to Canada when you're 4 years old, by the next year, you're almost everybody who's 4 years old in 1 year can master a language. So 4-year-olds have no problem. 20-year-olds, on the other hand, and 30 and 40 and 50-year-olds find it very, very difficult. And it's rare, even for 20-year-olds, to ever fully master a second language if they weren't exposed to it as a child. So if you go from French, say, to Spanish, at 20, it's easy enough to be able to become a fluent Spanish speaker. And many people we'll even be able to learn an accent and everything like that. But if you go from Urdu to English or Urdu to French or French to Urdu, much more difficult if you weren't raised in an environment where Urdu sounds are made and Urdu is spoken, or French, depending on which direction you're going. So you're forever marked. You're right away. People can tell, oh, you're Polish, or oh, you're. They might not even be able to. They might not even know. What they would know is you're not one of us. You're from away. And other markers of that are also available: diet, religious practices. Yeah. So we get that now. In addition, another source of laborers was Chinese workers. Chinese workers were allowed, were in one of the ways that it used to be described, but as I almost say it out loud, I realize how unfelicitous a way we used to be described. The Chinese workers were imported the way we import timber or lumber. Chinese workers migrated to Canada, were accepted as migrants to Canada under very different legal circumstances and on an absolutely unequivocally racial basis. It was widely believed by seemingly, it's hard, there were no opinion surveys back then, so we can't be sure about how widespread these views were. We can't be as sure how widespread the views were then as we can be sure about how widespread certain views are today. There are limitations on our knowledge today, but the limitations on our knowledge today of how widespread those views were back then is obviously much higher. But so within those limitations, what we do know is that overwhelmingly, the opinion expressed in newspapers supported restrictions on or expressed reservations, expressed deep concern, racially motivated deep concern about the ability of Canadian society to maintain itself if high levels and the tolerance for what counts as high was very low. High levels of Chinese migrants were accepted into Canada. But the kind of work that they were put to was work that it was very difficult to find already difficult to find Canadians to complete. Kinds of other, lots and lots of people very quickly who could be quickly sent home. Unlike the conditions under which white migrants were invited to Canada and under which existing Canadians were prepared to impose on these white migrants. This is where the circularity of this vision of Canada as a white Christian place constrained its policy action. Insofar as Canada saw itself as a white Christian place, it imposed on itself that view included a commitment to shared values that were shared with those other white Christians. It meant we couldn't abuse white Christians, except in several specified ways, in ways that the majority of the population did not feel constrained towards anyone else on earth. There was a kind of brotherhood of white Christians that meant that we would hold each other to a certain standard with respect to each other, a standard we did not impose on ourselves for the rest of the population on earth. And so we could bring in Chinese workers and get rid of them like garbage or like used up whatever, in a way that we weren't prepared to do to people from Wales and England and Scotland, and then eventually people from France and Germany and Switzerland, and eventually only much more recently, really, Portugal and Italy, and then much later and only incompletely today from the rest of the world. But one of the significant differences, one of the shocking differences is the explicitness with which the racial and the religious exclusion and inclusion parameters were defended. We're going to watch a movie later in the semester, Continuous Journey. Have you ever heard of the movie Continuous Journey? It's about the Komagata Maru ship that was prevented from docking in Vancouver, and it was full of largely, I think 80% of the passengers were Sikh migrants, and they weren't allowed to dock, even though Canadian law had included a rite of passage for any member of the Commonwealth, which all the people on that ship were. But even though the law required, and that was subsequently recognized, the Canadian authorities and the British Columbia authorities delayed the handling of the law case long enough that the ship had to return to India before the case was resolved. And although the case eventually was successfully resolved in favor of the ship owner, it was too late for all of the passengers, and the public outcry was articulated in shockingly racist terms, shockingly to by comparative standards today. Okay. So by 1919, one of the sort of background themes of the course is the complicated nature of the relationship between social structures and the lived experiences of the people in those social structures. And one way that scholars study that is they pay attention to the aspect of nation building, so that in setting out laws and in changing laws, legislation responds to different circumstances, but it imposes itself on society, and its impact on the society over which this legislation is binding is a manifestation of a kind of conscious project to form a society. Sometimes to reform a society, other times to expand that society, in other ways to realize the essence of that society. But some aspects in these laws are stressed, others are in complicated ways. Often societies are blind to the ultimate consequences of the kinds of legislation that they're passing. And it's only after a while that it comes to be clearer to the people who are implementing these laws that the society that's being created through these changes in laws is coming to be. And that this nation building, this idea of legislation as nation building is not a Canadian phenomenon. Social scientists who study any part of the world carry that analysis out. Bangladesh and Pakistan, when the partition of India occurred, the development of a Pakistani identity and a Bangladeshi identity were in many ways very clearly connected to different sets of laws and different areas of priority in order to set apart Pakistani society from Indian society, and the same with all kinds of different places, North Korea and South Korea. When a new country emerges, one of the things it does, and it does it often, it justifies this as something that's necessary, is that it has to establish itself as the country that it is. And so the immigration, so the connection to World War I is Canada's participation in World War I, so in many ways, World War I was the first industrial war. Maybe the American Civil War, maybe the Crimean, there's a variety of different candidates for exactly what was going on. But World War I, as a global conflict, the scale of production required to logistically supply and maintain the logistical supply of the combatants was on a different level than anything that had been experienced in human history up until then. And railways and telegraphs, this industrial infrastructure that was crucial for the expansion of capitalism, was also crucial for the carrying out of the mass carnage that occurred in World War I. Killing became much more efficient when it was industrialized. And so the machine gun is the machine gun and the airplane bombing are good, are accurate icons for this industrialization of death that World War I represented. But in order to provide the necessary bureaucratic conditions, not just for the production of these goods that were required to expand the murder scale that World War I represented, also required an increase in human power, in human organizational power. Lots of bureaucracy was required to supply enough bullets and boots and ships to do the killing, but also to coordinate the efforts of the remaining production in all of the different countries so that food could be produced and delivered sufficiently to continue support within the population of each of these countries for the kinds of sacrifices that carrying out war on that scale require. And so the role of government in the economy as an economic entity, but also the role of government in organizing society to coordinate the economic production, expanded dramatically. And at the end of World War I, that expansion of government never looked back. So it was during World War I, for example, in Canada, the income tax was introduced during World War I in order to pay for the massive increase in government expenditures that were required to furnish the weapons that Canadian soldiers needed to fight in World War I, and also to finance all of the extra material that was produced by Canadian industry to replace European production that had been destroyed by the very fighting that they were sending these weapons over to accomplish. And in order to finance that, unlike recent wars where the governments are just borrowing the money, an income tax was initially introduced on a temporary basis to finance the war effort. But governments early on understood that this source of money ended up being, in many ways, absolutely compatible with an expanding capitalist economy. Income tax turned out not to have the negative impact on the economy that many people, even including economists, feared. As long as the economy and in particular wages were growing fast enough, then the standard of living could increase even though taxes were being taken against people's incomes. So, and that's just one example among many. So the size of government expands and the scope of government, so the bureaucratic requirement that was to some degree learned by government departments for ordering enough boots and so on, required a kind of hierarchization. And so job descriptions, these sorts of things become a standard component of Canadian bureaucracies and many, many bureaucracies around the world. And accompanying legislation is mapped onto that. The legal infrastructure is bureaucratized in a parallel kind of way. Okay, and so now. 104. Yeah, I'm gonna have to scoot forward here. So a grade, an official recognition in the regulations manifest a for the first time we have evidence in the regulations of this graded of a tolerance gradient. So of course, British people are going to be welcome to Canada. Canada understood itself in 1913 and in 1919. And to some degree, some Canadians anyway, I guess, still do see themselves as part of the Commonwealth. And in Canada in 1919, in many ways, they identified more as members of the Commonwealth than they did as Canadians. The term Canadian started in Quebec as a way for Francophone members of the British Empire to distinguish themselves from the English-speaking people who were in Canada, who identified themselves as members of the Empire. So the term Canadian itself, and the song, the national anthem, "O Canada," was written by a Francophone in French as a nationalist song for Francophones to assert and to, in a way, create, and this is another version of nation building, to create, to build the French nation. The Canadiens were initially non-English people. And it's only over the course of the 20th century that the majority of Anglophone and early on white Anglophones increasingly identified primarily as Canadians and only secondarily as members of the, not exactly members, but as part of the of the British Empire, and then later the Commonwealth. And so, Britons, as members of the Empire and then the Commonwealth, British people didn't even need passports. They could just come to Canada. But other places were, the government recruited and the government accepted people from these places on a scale. So these countries were sort of the first line of people from Newfoundland. Only became part of Canada in 1949. So Newfoundland, you had to emigrate from Newfoundland for a long time. And then there's a kind of proximity, a sort of, essentially it's a whiteness scale. If you're from London, England, you're fully white. If you're from Paris, you're marginally less white. And if you're from Naples, you're considerably less white. Or Barcelona, or however you want to go, if you go south. And the internal contradictions to all of these kinds of distinctions almost always manifests itself in the detail. So somehow, if you're from Germany, you're more white than if you're from Italy for reasons that have no historical basis. They don't really have a linguistic basis. It's really unclear exactly how these kinds of distinctions get made. Central Europeans were seen to be more backwards by the elites who took it upon themselves to articulate this self-understanding. Yeah.
How would they have a way of knowing? Like I could have been from Germany. I could have come to Canada and be like, I'm from England, and then how would you have known? How do you have fact checked that?
I mean, well, I don't know when passports were first introduced around then. But it's a good question, and there's loads of anecdotal evidence that where people could, they'd lie, they'd fake it, they'd say, oh yeah, of course I'm from Ireland, or you know, and they would people who were linguistically gifted could fake that. There were other markers like skin color that would make those kinds of you know, reinventions difficult or impossible, but yeah, a 10-year-old kid from Germany who's been here for a year and a half can easily be sent to somewhere else and just say, no, I've been here all my life, and no one would ever be able to tell. And to a certain degree, it's only in the face of conflict that these kinds of differences surface in a problematic way. But a lot of it's learned. Racist parents raise racist children. And basically nobody's born with these stupid ideas. We have to be introduced to, we have to be introduced to the good ideas too, but yeah.
I also imagine that some people have more Polish traits, some people have more German traits, but like, yeah, I mean, it is kind of.
There is absolutely no way of fact checking.
No,
anything.
No.
but they probably have papers, like some such a
Yeah.
get in, and no, I think
I could
Lying
have
would be
a
easier.
Canadian
Yeah.
passport, but then I would still not be considered like white Christian Canadian, right? Even though I have a Canadian
lying
passport.
not even much easier though.
Right, and so this is anecdotal, so I'm not, I think this is to some degree of fact. In the United States, to a greater degree than in Canada, but in Canada also, a lot of people claim Irish descent, and I think what happened is a lot of Germans, when they got here, said they were from Ireland. And because there was a marginal advantage to being seen to have come from Ireland compared to Germany. And so in Ireland, although most people today, almost everybody today speaks English, there's an Irish language, Gaelic, and if you were a unilingual Gaelic speaker, then you wouldn't speak English necessarily. So the people who lived in Canada knew that Ireland had non-English speaking Irish people. So you could just claim, well, no, you know, I'm not Polish, I'm Irish. And again, if I own a farm and it's harvest time, really what I need from you is that you're willing to put in some labor for me. And as long as you're willing to work, that's the main issue, you know, that's my main issue for the next couple of weeks. Then, you know, if you're going to come to school, like that, it might get tricky later, but or early on. And then, so then you go from being Tomasz Tadeusz to being Tommy O'Reilly fairly easily. And so apparently in the United States, there's something like 10 times more people who claim Irish descent than it's possible could have come from Ireland over the century. And so some ethnicities are perceived to be less objectionable, you know, if not more acceptable. But one manifestation of this that I don't understand well, but part of the British Empire's relationship to all of the different peoples who lived and came from India was that they identified some groups in India as martial, that is warlike, and they favored them. And some were seen as effeminate, and they were dismissed. And so there was this internal hierarchy of racism within the British. So they despised differently and differentially different groups for largely in ways that they projected. So in a certain way, there's no such thing as Polish traits, and there's no such thing as Irish traits. There's, it's not quite as cut and dried as that. There are tendencies, let's say, but to a great degree, this is this always exists against the background of underlying power structures. And so the people who are in power are able to constrain how those categories get constructed and the extent to which exceptions to the categories are allowed and the tolerance and all of these. In the medium and long run, it's always the powerful members of any given society who are able to constrain and control these
So
things
people would
until
have,
they're forced not to.
so people would have had to fit the people who make the laws version of a Polish person
Yeah,
to be accepted, not just because they were Polish, but because they fit the idea of what a Polish person looks like in their eyes.
exactly. You can't be Polish, you read, or, I don't know what the particular details would have been, but that kind of thing. Okay, so now I want to get though to. Right, so following World War I, there's 10 years of economic growth, peaking in 1929, and then there's 10 years or 5 years at least, 5 years of, there's 2 or 3 years of rapid decline, and then there's a stabilization, and then with World War II, the global economy picks up again, and there's also a great deal of disagreement about the cause and effect relationship between the economy and the war and so on. But we saw last week briefly that immigration to Canada diminishes dramatically. The Canadian government accepted far fewer migrants to Canada in the early 1930s because the economy had shrunk and the Canadian economy wasn't producing enough food to feed the people who were already there, and they weren't producing enough money to pay wages for the work that needed to be done in Canada. So migration is retrenched at that point. And then, so the transition, so we have a post-World War I timeframe, and the expansion of the activity and the footprint of the state over society, partly through its impact on the economy, but also partly through the range of programs that the government involved itself in, expanded that much more after World War II, to a great degree following the same kinds of dynamics. Insofar as participation in World War I required the very rapid transformation of the Canadian economy from a peacetime production to wartime production. In World War II, the scale of that was even larger. The productive demand on the Canadian economy to participate in World War II was even greater. And it's worth noting that the United States doesn't enter into World War II until 1942. So 39, 40, 41, well, till the very end of 41. But for those first 3 years, the United States is not an active combatant in the war, although their economy is slowly transitioning to take advantage of the market that is generated, so the market for all of these weapons, but also because there was a strong percentage, not enough to generate, so there was division within the United States. All the way through World War II, there were lots and lots of members of the elite and of the population of the United States that wanted nothing to do with World War II. They felt it was none of their business. Once Pearl Harbor happened, that changed dramatically the extent of isolationism, but right up until Pearl Harbor, there were there was very strong support for non-involvement in World War II. And that maintained a part. Now, that did not mean that they weren't willing to sell bombs to whoever, or tanks or boots or anything like that. That's just business from their point of view. Whereas in Canada, there was much broader support right from the beginning, and the Canadian government was 100%, the Canadian government was much more effectively mobilized, and there was a much broader agreement within the government and within the population that we had a responsibility to participate fully in World War II. And that resulted in transforming the economy into a war economy on an even larger scale. And so, again, that involved, instead of letting markets determine the price, policy had to determine the price, and short-term strategic considerations had to determine the price. And that requires lots more people taking a look at a lot more data to be able to figure out, well, how much wheat do we need to make bread to be able to have the population here not starve? And do we need, how much wheat is left over to do this? How much timber can we chop down to make boats or whatever? And how much ore, iron and coal can we extract in order to make the ships and the bullets that they need over there? We're going to sell it to them. They can pay us later, so that there's going to be some profit to be had, but the economy's transformed. And so the same general process, but at a higher level, is repeated through the course of World War II. And so we'll pick up the period from 46 to 62 next week. Okay, so I will finish up the putting you into groups. Are the three of you okay with being in a group?
I mean, you can do it randomly for all.
What's that?
You can just get a random for all here for like, I mean, we don't have a specific.
Right, you're gonna have to be in a group. Okay, so then I'll just put everyone in the hopper. And in some ways it'll, yeah, okay, so that's what I'll do. Right. Okay, so, okay, so I will see, hopefully see the three of you. Hopefully everyone will be here next week, but either way, I'll be here next.
I know for a fact that somebody's in Barrie, they're not gonna be able to do that.
Okay, now. I don't know. You will